I wanted to talk about this in the headlines, except that it's not really a headline. It's actually a TV show recommendation. If you're looking for something to watch, I've got a recommendation for you. And at least I thought this wasn't a headline, but the Daily Mail. So I was like, I don't know where I can put this in the show. The Daily Mail has come along and bailed me out because actually somehow my opinion of this TV show that I'm going to tell you about is headline news. Apparently. I mentioned it on Twitter a few days ago, and the Daily Mail just reported on my opinion of this TV show for some reason. I'll tell you the headline in a second, but first I just want to tell you about this show. So my wife and I, we love the reality show called Alone, which maybe you're familiar with. And if you're not, it's maybe the only true reality show that's ever existed. And the basic premise is that 10 experienced, skilled survivalists are dropped off alone in a remote spot in the wilderness. And the game is pretty simple. They have to survive out in the woods, build their own shelter, find their own food, all that kind of stuff. And if they've had enough, they can't do it anymore. They have a satellite phone. They call a rescue team, comes, evacuates them. Whoever stays in the woods the longest wins. And they win, I think, $500,000 or something. No camera crew. They have to film everything themselves. So it's a good show. It's not super exciting all the time because it's actually reality. Like the producers aren't there. It's not Survivor or something where the producers are there setting up challenges, and you've got the soap opera disputes between contestants. They're not even around each other. So you don't have any of that. It actually gets kind of boring through wide stretches of the show, which is what I like about it because I'm weird like that. And anyway, we found out that that's not the recommendation. I mean, you should watch that show if you haven't seen it. But we found out there's an Australian version of this show. And it's Alone Australia. That's what it's called. And the American version's been around for like 10 years. And they just started last year with the Australian version. Now, I've happened across the fact that the show exists. And I thought, that sounds great. Like, first of all, surviving in Australia would be pretty tough, you'd think. Like, Australia is a dangerous place. And I also thought Australians are a hardy people. I bet they could survive for months without tapping out. Usually on the American version, the winner survives 90 days, maybe at most, 100 days at most. I thought Australians, like they could, this show will go on for 6 years and they won't tap out. I mean, this will be really interesting. So we started watching it, and it is good. Like, it's great, actually, but for a completely different reason, for the opposite reason. It's the opposite of what I expected, which makes it unintentionally like the funniest show that I've ever seen. Because apparently the producers of the Australian version of Alone decided that making Alone Australia isn't really what they wanted to do. What they wanted to do is they wanted to make Alone DEI edition. That's what they decided. And they should have just called it that. Like, if you call it that, then this show, you'll have 10 million people watching the show. I mean, this would be, I wouldn't have to tell you about the show. You would have already heard about it. But that's what they did. So they got 10 contestants, just like the American version. But they did not get like gritty, skilled survivalist types. They were more concerned with checking all the PC boxes. So they ended up with 2 lesbians, 2 people who claim to be indigenous, this like Gen Z environmentalist guy, and other people, like most of whom are totally unqualified for wilderness survival at all. And I don't want to give any spoilers away. I've only watched a few episodes of the show, but spoiler alert. One of the lesbians dropped out after one night, started crying and dropped out after one night. One of the indigenous guys, this is my favorite thing, like at least just watch the second episode of the show. It's hilarious. This indigenous guy, he spends the whole first day like going on and on about how he's indigenous and he's in touch with nature and, he can do this because he's indigenous. Oh, by the way, did you know I'm indigenous? I'm indigenous. I'm so indigenous. I'm the most indigenous guy of all time. And then he starts crying and drops out after 24 hours because he was lonely. The Gen Z guy, I'm not making this up. I swear to you, I'm not making this up. The Gen Z guy, it's like 22 years old. He takes a COVID test out in the wilderness with a COVID test, and it comes back positive. And he immediately calls the med team to evacuate him and starts complaining that his heart is racing. And he's like, the med team comes in on their boat and they take him out, and he's curled up in the boat, like shivering. And he just tested positive for COVID 3 minutes ago. This was all on the first day. They lost 3 people on the first day, all of them crying. Like, I could do better than this. I could at least, I have very few survival skills of this type in the woods, but I could hack it for a few days at least. And you could just go down to Walmart and choose 10 people at random, and they would do better than these people are doing. And another guy, so there's another indigenous guy. So the one guy's gone now. There's another guy who, by the way, he's just a white guy. He's a complete white guy who keeps talking about how indigenous he is and all of his indigenous survival skills. Well, there's one scene, I think this is in the second episode, where he picks up a millipede, like a little millipede, and it's bright colored millipede, and he eats it. He tries to eat it, and it makes his tongue numb, and he spits it out because it's toxic, because it's a millipede. You don't eat anything that has that many legs, you don't eat it, of course. And if it's a bright colored insect with many legs, again, even I know you don't eat that. There's a reason why it's bright colored. Like that, an insect like that could just hang out. It's not worried about anything eating it. Why do you think it was so easy to catch? Because all of the animals in the forest are smarter than you. Meanwhile, again, I'm not making this up, each episode starts with a land acknowledgement. That's real. There are all kinds of these woke environmental restrictions, so they aren't allowed to hunt pretty much any game. They can't even use a fishing net because the endangered platypus might get caught in the net. So they can't eat. Like they're all there and they can't eat anything. And on the rare occasion that they do catch something to eat, like with a makeshift fishing line, most of them are vegetarians. So they get really emotional about the fact they have to eat. One woman, she caught an eel and she was really sad. She was like crying while she was beating the eel to death because she's a vegetarian. And then she ate it and was like trying to stifle her vomit while she's eating this poor creature. It's just, I'm telling you, it's a bunch of woke, whiny liberals sitting around crying and starving in the forest. It's great. There are 2 contestants on the show who actually know what they're doing and are gonna. It's what usually with this shit, when you watch the American version of the show, you never know exactly who's gonna win. With this one, there are 2 people. And you watch the show for 5 minutes, you're like, okay, it's gonna be one of them. Like, obviously it's one of them. Because they know what they're doing, they know how to build the basic survival structures, and they have a good attitude. Like, they have some stoicism to them, they're not crying the whole time. And so I highly recommend it. That's my take on the show. And here's the Daily Mail report, just so I can circle this all into the 5 headlines. Anti-woke American Matt Walsh unleashes at Alone Australia with blistering review. That was that. I'm not going to read the article because it just repeats everything I just said. I don't know why it's newsworthy. It's actually kind of sad because this was Daily Mail Australia who had this report about me talking about it on Twitter. And I guess in Australia, they're so starved for attention, like they're so ignored by the world that some podcaster in America mentioning one of their shows is headline news, even though I hated it. So I got to say, and I'm sure there are great people in Australia, but my opinion of Australia, I'm just being honest with you, my opinion of Australians has just plummeted. Like, before COVID, I thought that Australia was, first of all, an absolute hellscape where poisonous spiders rain from the sky. That part is true, but then I further thought that because of that, anyone who lives there, these have to be like the toughest sons of on the planet. I really thought. I thought it was just I thought it was a whole country of Steve Irwins. That's what I thought. And from COVID and now ending with this, I'm like, how is Australia the weakest, wokest, lamest country on earth? How is that possible? And if you have this few survival skills, how are you living in the country to begin with? I don't get it. It's amazing. If you'd like to see what else I have to say, you can access my full show by going to dailywire.com or by going to the Matt Walsh Show Twitter page. Hope to see you there. Godspeed.